You were saying about the worst interviews? I just remembered the worst one ever. I'd forgotten about this, actually. Let's call him Philip. And he came to me, and he was needing to connect with people in territories all over the world, and he needed to explain the idea. It was perfect podcast territory. Needed an explanation, needed people to pick it up all over, couldn't fly all over the world and talk to everybody. So it was great. So I remember having a conversation with him in the coffee shop about it and taking on his notes and said, this is going to be fine, Phil. Let's fix a time to talk about what we're going to talk about, and then let's fix a time to do the interview, which is the 2-step process that we follow. And he was fine, and at the first pre-chat he was good, and he explained to me what the problem was that they were looking at, and it was to do with something to do with data collection, some new data collection system. And he explained what the problem was and how they were solving it, and he even knew the kind of particular points that he needed to get over to get people to use it. I thought it was going to be great. And it was only a short thing he wanted. He wanted 5 minutes just to put out. So fine. An hour and 15 minutes after we had started, in the end, I said to him, I broke my cardinal rule. I absolutely broke my cardinal rule. And I said, just wait a minute there, Phil. And I wrote down what he should say. And I said, read that.
What led you to this?
Because he just couldn't do it. He was so spooked by the whole microphone thing, I guess, or the interview, that he would lose his train of thought. He would stumble over his words. His mouth would dry. I got him several cups of water. It was just ridiculous. I thought at one point, am I being spoofed here? He was the interviewee from hell.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like the guy, but I have to say, after a while, I started to get really frustrated because we boiled the points down that he needed to make to 3 or 4 very simple bullet points, which we clearly understood. And I had very straightforward, gentle questions that I put to him to open these points up. And I'd say, well, okay, Phil, just tell me, though, what are the main features you think of the new system that people will enjoy? Well, the main points, there are three points, what we want people to think about, and I'm thinking, this is a guy who we've had almost 2 hours of conversation about this, and he knows it backward. And you stop him in the corridor and ask him, and he'd be fine. He could wax lyrical about it. I mean, he was a bit of a nerd, but that's no problem. Nerds, once you get nerds going, they make great interviewees. But it was just something about being in that room with me, with the just completely threw him. And it was, and after an hour, there's the usual thing. Once you get beyond 45 minutes, interviewees start to get really tired. So I could see that we were basically losing the plot. It wasn't going to happen. So that's why in the end I said, look, read it. And he read it, and it sounded like someone reading it, and I hated it, but it was the only way I was ever going to get anything for him. A couple of years later, I was talking to that BBC engineer that I told you about that used to do some of this stuff for me, and he gave me a tip. And I was telling him about this, and he said, yeah, it happens sometimes. But he said one thing that sometimes they do at the BBC for those kind of interviewees, where they just can't get it, is you try and put them in an environment where they will feel really comfortable. And one thing you can do sometimes is make them walk.
Oh, okay.
You mic them up so that they can be recorded while they're walking. And just that act of walking, I don't know, maybe it gives them something else to focus on or think about. It can distract them and they calm down.
Interesting technique, yeah. It just gets them kind of settled and more in their own head. I mean, that Philip sounds like an extreme case, though.
Yeah, he's the worst ever. I've never had anybody else like him ever, no.
I've heard you give several other stories where somebody is, first 10 or 15 minutes, they're kind of stumbling around, not getting there. But then they settle in and it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, it's not unusual for people to come in and you could tell they're really nervous and you could tell they've got sweaty palms and their body language basically says they'd rather be having root canal surgery than talking to you. But apart from him, I've always managed to get them to a point where once they get talking on a subject about which they are passionate, then they forget everything and you get the good stuff.